Yeah, g'day for people that haven't met me. I'm Robbie Hill, sheep and bee farmer like Greg in here in the Hawke's Bay. I also have my own consulting advisory business, Holistic Ag, and accredited under the Savoury Institute for doing EOV monitoring. So it's a outcome-based monitoring program. It operates all around the world, and we're fortunate enough to have a hub here in New Zealand. We are measuring farms annually, and there's probably about 50 different metrics of what we measure, so we can go through some of these. So yeah, what we're trying to see over time is that whatever management practices people are having on farm has X outcome. So we're measuring those outcomes of what we see, and we're measuring the ecological health of that landscape's what we're in. So we want to see over time trend lines being positive and improving that ecological health index. And if that ecological health index, you can be accredited and certified as a regenerative property. And with that, then you're able to leverage off Savoury's land to market program, and yeah, there's a whole lot of market opportunities, particularly overseas, from not just meat, but any pelts, hides, by a lot of different byproducts. So yeah, and we're finally starting to see it's kind of paying fruition now, because we're actually starting to see premiums for these products for the farmers. So it's a good carrot there for farmers to change what they're doing and actually having a bit of more holistic understanding on what they're doing on farm, and having those desired outcomes that we want to see. So yeah, so what we do in our very first year, we do a baseline monitoring, and that takes approximately 2.5 days per farm for the first day, for the first baseline. And we are taking between 1 and 3 what we call long-term Transect sites, depending on the topography aspect of the land use class and everything like that. So in the case here of Mangarara, we have 3 different kinds of land use classes, I guess. We've got the hill country, we have this rolling country, and then we have those peat flats. So we have 3 different transect lines, and we're monitoring them every 4 years. So a transect line it's all GPS pointed. We start in one place and we run ropes pointing north, and then on one line it comes down and then branches out, and then we have 3 transect lines. So on the first 2 transect lines, every 25 centimeters, we put a piece of wire or a pin in the ground, and we're measuring how many different species that bit of wire is touching, and also registering and writing down the names of those species. So we do that on the first 2 transect lines, and that's called the Shannon Weaver Index. And with that, then it gives us a species richness number. And so that's what we do on those 2 lines. We also, at the first point, we take photo plots. So we take that in 4 different directions. And then the third line, third transect, we actually take photos of 1 metre squared, and we take photos every 2.5 metres. So we take 10 photos pointing straight down. And so we wanted to try and see that transition and change over time. We also do, on the long-term transects, we do infiltration tests, so how long it takes for an inch of water to soak in, and with that then it gives us our effective rainfall and how long it takes for that. So that's measured in millimetres per minute. And so we're doing that off the end of all 4 corners, and we're repeating that 2 to 3 times per corner. So we're getting quite a bit of data around that as well. We're also, off each 4, we're taking soil samples, and we are now measuring that for, there's about 7 or 8 different measurements of what we're taking it from, and they're from pH, carbon, malic 3P, organic matter, electrical conductivity, bulk density. Yeah, so we take those soil tests and we're going back to those exact spots and taking them every year. So yeah, we do that on 3 different places around the property, and they're the ones we do every 4 years, like I said. And in between each year, we still go back to the same properties, and we also do what we call short-term monitoring, and that is getting a range of different sites over the property. So on this farm here we had 11 sites, and that's split up between how much area they have of those different land use classes. So on here there's more rolling country, so we had I think 4 from memory on this country, and then kind of maybe 4 up there, and then the remainder on the flats. And so we have a GPS point what's representative of the paddock. So we're finding a paddock that's representative of that class, and we won't be doing it in a gateway or anything. We go out in the middle of a paddock, and so then we have 12 different metrics what we're measuring for ecological health. So firstly, when we go into a paddock, we dig a hole, we take a photo of the hole, plus again trying to face north what's representative of the paddock, and a photo at 45 degrees. We're measuring how much cover there is in that paddock, the quality of that cover. We're also doing, with the hole, we're doing a basic visual soil assessment. So we're doing that for texture and porosity and colour and rooting depth and worms. And so we do measurements on, that's on a range of 1 to 4. And so we want to be seeing that improving over time as well. But most of the measurements are around are these ones that are part of the Savoury, and that's for what actually gives you ecological health index number. So the first one is, so there's also grazing, how they grazed. So we have between set stocking through to intensive rotation, and then we have, or we might have a slight partial rest, or we might have overgrazing. So there are a lot of the different ones. Then we have an intensity, so that's if there's nil intensity, is pretty much set stocked, through to intensive being like a a very, very big mob, or in a very small area shifted multiple times a day, like Greg was doing down on those flats there, were what we would call intensive. So for the one of the very first scores we do is live canopy abundance. So that's any green leaf area what we have. And we're relating this to the potential of what we'd expect that plant would be able to grow to maximise photosynthesis. So if we were looking throughout this whole paddock, you can see we've got some huge covers in here. So these scores are weighted, and depending on these metrics, some of them are negative and some of them are positive in ranges. So for live canopy abundance, is a -10 score to a +10. So there's 5 different scores you could get. You could get a -5, a 0, a +5, and a 10, and a -10. So in this case here, I would score this in that 80 to 100% of the potential, as being that this paddock cannot really get much more cover than what it actually can. So I would score this in a range between 5 and 10. So yeah, I'd probably score as a 10. So the next one is living organisms. So this is what we see from earthworms, is a big one. Also, if you walk into a paddock, you can just sometimes sense that there's a lot of life in the paddock. So you walk in there, there's a lot of life, things flying up at you. And then also down, if I get down onto the soil surface, we want to see how much bugs and creepy crawlies there are actually crawling around in the ground. And on a day like this, to be honest, it's hard to see a lot of those little mites and bugs because it's so wet. But we take that into consideration. So in this paddock here, I can see plenty of worms. I can see a lot of worm castings. I know there's a lot of activity happening, but I know that it could still I would like to see that ground absolute crawling, so I'd probably put that bang smack in the middle as a 0, so that's a -10 to 10 as well. Yeah, so I get trained, I get calibrated every year, and I do this on about 40 properties. So, and I do a minimum of 10 per property, so I do at least 400 of these every year. Yeah, yeah. So I'll open that up and have a look for myself. It's on a day like today, it's actually quite difficult to see that, but you can tell it's just you're wanting to try and find evidence of them being there. So, you know, if you're seeing a lot of worm castings and stuff like that, that really does play a part. Yeah, so that's for that's probably the most subjective measurement out of all of these. The next one is functional group of grasses. So that is, we want to start seeing the functional species of what we would see in a natural grassland ecosystem in Hawke's Bay. Like, what would be the species that we would like to see? So ones would be like what we have here is tall fescue, timothy, cocksfoot, tall fescue, and in the summer ones would be paspalum, prairie grass would be one in the winter. So we want to see a diverse range of those species in here. So again, this is weighted as a -10 to 10, and that's scored on both how vigorous and how much live canopy leaf area we have as half of that scoring, and the other half is associated to how many of those species there are present in here. So we can see it's very cocksfoot dominant, and there's not many other kind of grass species. There's definitely going to be ryegrass and a few other bits and pieces in here. So it's not going to get a full score on the diversity front, but again, it's got lots of vigour, and we can see that it has been going reproductive, what means that we are going to get that perpetuity in the long term. So it's able to fully self-reproduce and regenerate, and getting those new seedlings coming up through in the start of the new season. So yeah, I would score this as a 5, being -10 to a 5 for that. The next one is Forbes and Legumes. So Forbes and Legumes are anything from your clovers, your plantains, your chicories. It could even be dock, anything that's got a broad leaf. So again, functional groups in that of what we would like to see would be, in this country, would be white clover, subclover, there's a clover burr, what's up on that hill country I've seen before, and that's got a black dot in the clover. And then there's a few other annual ones, and then we also want to see, say, plantain would be another one. So in this paddock, I can just see looking around, it's all just white clover. Oh, red clover would be another one. So, you know, I can see we've got a lot of white clover in here. And again, we're scoring that on a -10 to 10. And so it's got mainly just white clover in here by the looks of it, but there's lots of it. I think there's actually more in here. What I was just saying to Greg earlier, that there's a lot more clover in here this autumn than there was in the springtime, what's actually quite interesting. So again, yep, we're measuring it, and I would score that as a 5 again, because it can't get any further, because it doesn't have that diversity of those functional species. It's still missing a few of them. So what's the next one? Trees and shrubs. So for this whole mob of heifers, is there enough shade and shelter for them out in that paddock? So if I went up to this hill and had to look, I'd say, what do you reckon, Greg? Yes or no? So again, that's a score of 10 to -10. So we're looking to get a full 10. We want to see enough shade and shelter for all of these animals. So it's actually quite a difficult one to get a full score on. But we take things into consideration, such as shelter belts, ones around the edges. So yeah, on this paddock here, there's quite a few down there, but yeah, it wouldn't score any higher than a 0. So that's a 10 to -10. and -10 being there's absolutely nothing in the paddock or on any boundary. So the next one is undesirable species, so that's weeds, and it's what the farmer deems as a weed. So some people might see dock as an example that might see dock as a problem, as a weed, others don't. One I'm noticing a lot is Californian thistles. And so we're scoring that, instead of being a 10 to -10, these have a score of 0 to -10, because any weed, what the farmer deems is having a negative effect on the overall ecological health. So a 0 is the highest score. This paddock here, there's none, so it's a 0. And 5 would be, say, you know, there's a partial infestation, through to a 10 being that it is throughout the whole paddock and it is severely impacting the production of that paddock. So a 5 would be that it is partially affecting that production in some way. The next one is litter. So that's any dead material on the ground. So again, if I come to look back here, I want to see this whole area completely covered in litter, that I shouldn't be able to see that bare soil like I can if I fold that back. So there's definitely litter there, but I'd still like to see more, and that's what really gets that mineral cycling going. So that's giving any litter that's on the ground is helping in a positive way for your ecological health index. So those have a score of 0 to 10. So a 10 being that's fully covered, and in this case there's partial covering here, so that would be a score of 5. So and that's what really starts giving you that perpetuity again, and letting those minerals cycle throughout your soil. So yeah, and that comes from obviously not grazing every blade of grass you have on your property, and able to go and trample some of that into the ground using density. So there's a bit happening here, and we'll see over time that it's going to get better and better. Particularly under cocksfoots, I've noticed you can get a lot more of this happening. You get a lot more of that litter. The next one is litter incorporation, and again, when I dig my hole, I can then see, you shouldn't be able to see a visible line between your soil surface and the litter or the grass growing above it. It should be a very non-distinct line where you can't see that, and that's where you can start seeing worms and biology working and actually pulling that litter down into the soil, and that's what actually helps make those cycles those nutrients, and we can see that actually happened over time. So and yeah, so that's a big one, and that leads on to bare soil. Dung decomposition. So litter again is a score of 0 to 10, being because it has a positive impact. Dung decomposition is 0 to 10 too, and that's if a 0 being you come into a paddock and you can see, you know, that white crusty cattle stuff that's just sitting there on top. You can grab it, you could throw it in a water trough and it floats. If that's the case, it means it's not breaking down, and then so that there's not cycling. So that would be a 0, and a 10 is you go into a paddock and you can't see any. So in this case here, I'd have to go for a good wander, but it would be most likely a 10 in this paddock. Yeah, so we work on a 30-metre circle around our site, so it gives you a bit of a good indication, so we're not just looking just in this little area in here. So the next one is bare soil. This is the heaviest weighting out of everything. This has a score of -20 to 20, so it's got the biggest range and is the easiest one to fix just by lifting covers up. So a score of 20 is there's no bare ground, and then a score of 10 is you're in that range of 80% cover to 10% cover, all the way down to -20 being more than 40% bare soil. So that would be the lower end, and the rest sit in between that. So that's the biggest weighting, and that's the most low-hanging fruit for most farmers for improving their scores. The other one is capping. So again, at the soil surface, if I can break that with my finger like I can, particularly at the moment because it's very wet, That's a score of 0 to -10. -10 meaning I have to get a sharp metal object and break that, and that means that water's not able to infiltrate into that, so that has a negative effect on the ecological health index. So in that case there, that has a score of 0 to -10, so that's the highest score of a 0. And then we have wind erosion, so that's evidence of some sort of wind erosion. So that might be anything from a cultivated paddock and you've seen it banked up at the edge of a fence line, or you might have a couple of plants there and you can see it's that light topsoil is banked up and you can see it there. So any kind of evidence of that. So that's a score of 0 to -20. In this case it's a 0. But yeah, obviously -20 is significant amount of erosion, and that obviously has a negative effect on ecological health. And the final one is water erosion, and that can be in the form of anything from a slip, stream bank erosion, or able just to see rilling down the sides of a paddock. Particularly in bare ground, that's when you start seeing it in low covers, and it could be just, you can see where the water would run down the side of down the slope or something. So that has a score again of 0 to -20. -20 is over half the paddock slipped away, say on a hillside or something like that. -10 is just showing any signs of it at all. So yeah, that's kind of stream bank erosion, and big sheet erosion, slips and stuff like that are ones. But yeah, I haven't really come across many ones that would have a -20, because that's a significant slip. So yeah, that's pretty much it really in a quick run through. Any questions?
How many guys like you are there in
Well, Bee's done her first lot of training. There's 2 of us that can do the long, so there's one person that has the hub, and then he trains other people underneath him. I'm just one underneath him. And there's 2 of us, or probably 3 or 4 on the way, that can do the whole baselines, like the long-term transect lines. And then there's probably around a dozen to 15 that can do the short-term monitoring, so that's the ones, the year in between ones. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there such thing as like a obviously more simplified version of that framework that farmers can do themselves?
Well, the whole idea of it at the end of the day is we want farmers to get interactive in this and be able to actually, in the end, monitor between themselves and the catchment. Would be awesome. Hasn't really happened yet, but yeah, this is growing. It's doubling and land bases each year pretty much, and yeah, so it's only been about 3 or 4 years. Yeah, I've been involved with this for 3 years now. I actually do a lot of my work for Atkins Ranch, a meat company here in Hawke's Bay that have run a pilot for 3 years now. So that's how I do majority of mine, and they're getting a premium. So yeah, they've got a good carrot there too.
Is that through the Savoury Institute?
Yep. No, it is. Yep. They actually bought the market to Atkins Ranch. Yep. So yeah, that's. Yeah, are you meaning in like a brassica crop, or are you meaning cropping in general? Yeah, so if it's like winter feed and stuff, it's definitely going to score down. We still, say if we had a short-term site in that paddock, it would still get monitored, and yeah, it will score down because it is a monocrop. Say if it was a diverse winter feed paddock, it'll probably score not too bad, because you've got that no bare ground, you've got diversity, you've got lots of leaf area. So, but yeah, majority of the people, farms we do, are still doing some sort of cropping, and it is hindering their scores, to be honest, and they need to start outweighing if getting a premium of $15 a lamb is better than cropping, what these guys are getting. So, you know, it's quite a significant number what they could be making, and they need to work out, because this has only just happened in the last 6 months, are they going to make more at $15 a lamb for a premium and not do any cropping compared to cropping? So, but they are trying to, so this is more for a pastoral system. They are trying to develop one, I know, in overseas for vineyards, orchards, full-on horticultural systems, because it's quite difficult because they don't have livestock. So how do you score dung as an example? Yeah, so yeah, the difference is what we want to do is gather this data so we can see if they're improving over time. And it doesn't matter if they drop off one year, if they go backwards, as long as the overall trend line is going in one direction, they can keep their certification.
So for the suppliers for compliance, what's the major failing that would mean that they don't get what's the common failing where they don't get the premium? Because you monitor every year, don't you?
Yeah.
Have to afford it themselves or everything.
Yeah, so it's because they've only just got this premium in the last 6 months. Not much has really changed. So it's going to be interesting moving on from this year to seeing what's happening. But the easiest thing to do is literally lift your covers up each year. Have a goal trying to reach it, say 1st of May, bring your covers up 200 kilos each year and work your way up slowly instead of running and diving in. Yeah, it's that if you could lift your covers up, that will bring your scores up of everything. You start getting a bit more diversity, such as red clover doesn't like being overgrazed, so you get that persistence. Or it might be, you're going to lift your covers up, you're going to get more of that live canopy abundance, that leaf area, so you're photosynthesizing more, putting more carbon into the ground. You're going to lift your covers up, you're going to have less bare soil. They're all related. And these are all, the ecological health is then broken down into 4 ecosystem services. Energy flow, community dynamics, mineral cycles and water cycles. So all those measurements are weighted in those. So bare ground comes across all 4 of them. So community dynamics is related to microorganisms and living. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It's a pretty cool job, and yeah, very fortunate to come and see all these different countrysides, and yeah, it's changing, and it's going to be interesting to see what farmers are going to do in the next few years now that there's a good carrot put in front of them. Yeah.
What made you choose that as the measurement? Like, are there many other like it that you know?
It's yes and no, because it's outcome based. Like most auditing is based on a prescriptive way that needs to be done, and it's more focused on the process and the inputs compared to this being outcome based. So that's in that case, and then we also give support to the farmers. So it's not actually just an auditing as such, because you're actually doing wraparound support. So that's probably the biggest difference. I guess overseas, yeah, there's a couple now, like more regenerative organic that's coming through like Roldale and stuff like that. But no, it's the most recognised one in the world for sure. Yeah.
How long do you have to show improvement for to get the certification?
2 years. So you do your first year, you can get in your second year. If you can actually get it in your first year, if we feel that the property is showing enough their management styles and are regenerative, what we believe is regenerative, they can kind of grandparent off the back of that what's only happened on 3 properties so far. Me and Greg are 2 of them. Yeah, quite a bit to take in, I know. Yeah, it's quite specific, I guess, but it's a good way to put some numbers on things, on what we're doing on farm, what isn't subjective, But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see once we do our next round of carbon sampling next year, particularly some that have done different management practices. We can actually see those outcomes, such as a lot of them have cropped a paddock in the middle of that rotation in those long-term site paddocks or regrassing. So it'll be interesting to see that data once we get it come through. Yeah.